You're listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, brought to you by the Raven Creek Social Club, where we talk about faith and other oddities. For questions, comments, or to be part of the conversation, join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find us at Raven Creek SC. Now for your hosts, Emily Dixon and Nathan Underwood.
Well, hey everyone, welcome back to Faith and Other Oddities. We are still in 1 Samuel. We just left David as he was getting ready to basically kill a bunch of people because they didn't feed him.
A typical teenage boy coming home.
Yeah, there are times. I know when I'm hungry, I feel that way. So.
Yeah, a little overreaction, but Abigail. She's smart. She's beautiful. She's discerning, and she's going to head off trouble at the pass. Sorry,
nip it in the bud.
Yeah, and so David is being approached by her, and we've just heard what he's thinking. Again, that unusual parallel with David and Saul, where we get to hear what David's thinking. So rare, where we have it all the time with Saul, but we've also seen Saul's words coming out of David's mouth. And so we kind of have to wonder what's going on here. And this is the beauty of the story. We're going to see a lot of role reversals, and we're going to see how the writer is just so adept at showing motivation and the reason why people do things with very simple techniques. And I'm really just shocked that we aren't studying this more often in church, because it's a great story. So David follows, he makes the oath, may God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by moving I leave so much as one man, all of whom belong to him. So there's two ways to read this. Like I said, it is an oath. One is that David is trying to bind God to an obligation to kill everyone that David didn't get around to killing.
Mm-hmm.
Proper use of his faith.
Because that's always a good idea, to try to manipulate God into something.
Oh, yeah, it will. And again, we're reminded right back of Saul and some other TV preachers. But anyway, remember in chapter 20, verse 15, Jonathan had promised God would cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. So David could possibly just be saying, hey, this is what you promised me, so evidently this is how it's going to work out. The second way is David saying God would kill him, David himself, if David failed to kill everyone. So either way, David is somehow trying to unite God with his bloodlust that has overtaken him. And
either way, he's kind of being a jerk about it.
He really is. And I don't think we can get around that. I don't think we can bypass them. And, the fact that David is trying to manipulate God should bother us. This is not something we should celebrate. This is what happened, not what should happen.
Right.
So in verse 23, we're told, when Abigail saw David, she hurried to get down from her donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. So we have another hint at Abigail's destiny, because this echoes Genesis 24, 62 through 67. And if you remember, Eleazar had gone to go get Isaac a wife, and he went and found Rebecca, and she's escorted. Eleazar at this point is the unnamed servant, just like Abigail has had the unnamed servants with her. And when Rebecca sees Isaac from afar, she falls from her camel, and this is their meeting. So we've got just a little hint in this little bit of foreshadowing that the author is just playing off of. Now, her speech is phenomenal.
There's some really funny stuff said in here.
It's great. It is the longest speech from a single woman recorded in the Bible. It's 150 words, 53 words in Hebrew. Deborah's song is longer, but we also have Barak in the chorus coming in, so we've got several voices. So this is the longest single speech from a woman. And she begins with, she falls at his feet and says, "Oh, on me alone, my Lord, be the guilt." So she begins the address by claiming all the responsibility for something she obviously had nothing to do with it. This writer was very clear. She did not create the situation. She did not respond to the situation. She makes this magnificent gesture, and this is in a time of a highly maligned patriarchy. And she basically says, I'm the one with the ability to change this. I'm the one with the power here. And that's the theme underneath this series of words that she spells out. Very proper, aligns to all the social etiquette and expectations of a woman of her day, but with a lot of punch behind that properness. So she says, please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. So she's calling herself his servant. This is the proper deference to a king as opposed to Nabal. Who is this David? Who is the son of Jesse? She's really, kind of easing that wounded ego of David, where Nabal had called him nothing more than a runaway slave. So verse 25, she says, let not my lord regard this worthless fellow, Nabal, for as his name is, so he is.
Now, is that also son of Belial there?
Yes.
Okay.
It is.
I'm just curious. I don't know why I find this theme so interesting. The phrase is just really interesting. So go ahead.
Well, and as we've discussed before, it's got some significant theological ramifications. And if we think of God having sons, then why would we reject the idea that evil can have sons?
Yeah, well, and I find it that, there's this idea of worthlessness and foolishness with it. And so anyway, there's something there that something about this phrase I've just been trying to track down. I'm probably annoying the listeners every time I ask this, but I'm just curious about how it's used, where it's used. And I probably need to do more independent study instead of wasting all of our recording time.
Well, what's interesting about it is that the translators typically don't translate it. You do have to go back to the KJV to find it.
Yeah, and I find it really interesting, like how you get to just worthless from son of Belial.
Yeah, that's so innocuous.
It seems so different that I can't understand. I don't. It just doesn't make sense to me why it would be so different. I don't know. So,
well, it's one of those translation choices that, again, I think we think the reader sometimes is stupid, and I think we don't realize that they can understand complex concepts if we just present them, and we present them consistently
and present them well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if your audience is not able to get the complex, I mean, now granted, there are some people who just are not going to get certain things, but I do think it says more about the presenter than it does about the audience.
Exactly.
If they're not understanding the complex material.
Well,
I mean, you can take that for what it's worth, but that's just my observation about life.
Well, and it does provide that wonderful, rich contrast of what it is to be a member of God's covenant community, and everyone who might be a son or daughter of Belial.
And and there's part of me that does wonder, and I'm going really far afield here, so just stop me if you think we need to save this for later.
You're making my notes go further, so
fair enough. But no, I keep thinking about how there is the idea of Satan as understood in the New Testament. It's a fairly new idea, really, whenever you get down to it. And before, I really feel like it might be kind of this influence of this dualistic mindset that we get, that we try to obscure some of these things, because Belial was considered one of the chief rebel angels, in a lot of the Second Temple literature. Yeah. And from what I understand from Miriam, if I followed Dr. Brand's podcast correctly, that he was one of the big players in this divine rebel group. And we always think of it, there's God and there's Satan and there's not anybody else. There's not this idea of, for lack of a better term, this evolution of the divine rebel character that we kind of, it seems like our translations, it's almost like it's an attempt to obscure that.
Right.
And so I wonder if that's why it bothers me so much. So
there is this very the obscuring of the evil is a huge issue, and I don't want to say so much within the Bible, but definitely within society. And so, who was it that said one of the greatest feats that Satan ever pulled off was to convince people he doesn't exist?
Yeah.
And so
it's not so much the obscuring of evil and evil entities. I think it's almost like there's an obscuring of the idea that there could be more than one, leader in the devil's army
Right.
or whatever. However you want. I mean, and I still realize that really falls short of what I'm trying to say. But it's that there's more than one like well-known demonic figure who's kind of a leader in the armies of evil or something like that.
Absolutely. That was definitely part of Second Temple Lit. And I think we can also, we can go back to the discussion last week where we were talking about the trees in the garden, where, it's like we believe there's only two options. They could only eat.
Yeah.
And we boil this down into simplistic terms. And, another name for Belial is Beliar. And so, Paul talks about him in Second Corinthians. So,
Okay.
So this is not something that was foreign to the New Testament.
And is that more of a like a transliteration type of
Yes.
thing within the Greek and the Hebrew?
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha.
And so it does most of the time, and I don't have time to look up all the different various translations, but it doesn't get watered down and it doesn't get obscured in the New Testament the way it does in the Old Testament, which is another interesting translation choice that I don't.
But to go from son of Belial to worthless, I mean, I get that it's an idiom,
Mhm.
but I also think it's very far away.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Idioms become that way through constant use. And
Sure.
so we have to look at why was it constantly being used.
Mm.
And, and phrases do lose their punch after so long of using them. I mean, I can remember certain words I would flinch away from when I was a kid because, oh no, it's a dirty word. And now it's like, whatever.
Well, yeah, there's that. And there's other phrases that get used and you're like, oh, wait, if you really break that down, what are you actually saying there?
Yeah, most of Dad's phrases.
Well, and some of Grandma's.
Yeah, I know.
So, anyway.
Okay, we're going to leave the family history behind on that one. So let me just start over with that verse because it's a really great verse. We're in verse 25.
Sorry, no, because, I'm sorry I interrupted right before Abigail said the really funny thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, so let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal. For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and his folly is with him. So, I mean, she's like, look, the guy's an idiot. He even comes with a warning label. What else do you expect from him?
I'm sure his parents were very lovely people.
Love their kids. It's definitely present there in the names. But go back to chapter 24 and verse 14 when David comes out to Saul and they're having that exchange outside the cave. And David tells Saul, after whom has the king of Israel come out? After whom do you pursue? A dead dog? A flea? Abigail's using the same line of reasoning on David that David used on Saul.
Yeah.
It's the exact same technique. Basically, this behavior is beneath you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Kings don't bother themselves with dead dogs, fleas, or fools.
Petty insults from people who don't know any better.
Exactly. And what I love about it, she does it in such a way that David is inspired by her words, not condemned.
Mm-hmm.
And she manages to remind him, hey, to keep pursuing him and to do anything against him is beneath you. It's not in keeping with your character. It's not in keeping with what you yourself have said you believe is true. Now, does she know about the story at the cave? Who knows? It could have gotten back to her. Chances are she didn't, though. So she says in verse 25, but I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent out. So, hey.
If you would have talked to me first, it wouldn't have been an issue.
Exactly. I'm the person who controls things here. I'm the one who gets them done. And I would have been more than happy to help. And I could have helped. You just, you talked to the wrong person. Not saying it's your fault, but, it's kind of your fault. It was, she's doing really wonderful things with the speech here. Verse 26, now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives, notice the counter oath there, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand. Now then, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. So basically, here's the counter oath. A counter oath undoes the first oath. We saw this with Jonathan when Saul made the stupid oath, just like David just made the stupid oath, and the people returned an oath for an oath, so the two kind of canceled each other out. And what I love about the story, this parallel, when you talk about Saul's foolish oath, you almost have to always go back to Jephthah and his foolish oath.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so there was no one to speak on behalf of his daughter. And so she dies. Jonathan, the people ransom him and he lives. And it took the weight of all of the people to save Jonathan's life.
Mm-hmm.
And now here's a woman, and she's the one who's going to save an entire city, not just one person. So we have that wonderful reversal of not just a single person being saved by a city. Now we have a city being saved or an encampment being saved by a single person and a woman to boot.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I do like the flip there where she says, "My husband's an idiot, but if you're going to kill a whole city on his behalf,
you're an idiot." Yes, yeah, exactly. You will be his Nabal, and that's she. And so she's not backing away from the truth, and that's the other thing I love about this, because she's setting it up. And she's setting it up in a way that he has to agree with her. There's a sales technique. You get 3 yeses to inconsequential questions, and then you ask the one of significance, and the person will almost automatically answer yes the 4th time.
Right.
So she's using almost a psychological trick to get David to see her way of thinking, and so she's continues in verse 27. And now let this present that your servant has brought, my lord, be given to the young men that follow my lord. Okay, so we've set up our argument. Now it's time to move on. We have a new action. I'm not going to let you sit here and stew. Remember, you're the king. As a king, your business is preserving life. It's time to feed the boys. And so and I kind of had this picture of Mimi when we were our grandmother telling Grandpa, "Come on, hon, now we got to get this done." It's kind of like, here's the shift. We've got to get focused on what needs to be done.
Right.
So verse 28, please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because the Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. So Abigail knows that David's the rightful king. Somewhere along the line, this secret anointing of David has been made public knowledge. Everyone knows who the next king is going to be. We're going to see that in the conversations as they continue.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's unaware. This means also, too, Nabal knew exactly who he was talking to.
Sure.
So he was not just David, the kid that ran around the streets in the town he grew up, but he knew who he was destined to be. Now, she says that David's going to have a sure house. This is a lasting dynasty, a legacy. It's not going to be fleeting. What's Saul been begging David to do? Don't cut off my house. Don't destroy my name. Make sure my kids live, because we can't be forgotten. And she's telling David, you're going to have this. Because what's the difference between a judge and a king? A king has an heir. A judge is appointed within their lifetime. After they're dead, you go on. There's no continuation of that quote unquote rule. Whenever you have a king, now you have to have an heir, and your reign as a king, and not just a judge or a ruling warlord, is only established when the son takes the throne, not just the man himself taking the throne. So she's saying that's what's going to happen. And it's because he fights the Lord's battles, unlike Saul, who slaughters priests.
Mm-hmm.
So she's setting up a very nice contrast. Verse 29, if men rise up to pursue you and seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God, and the lives of your enemies shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. So
and we know he knows how slings work.
Exactly. She reminds him his defense is in the Lord. He is being cared for by God. It can't be anything of his own making. And yes, and she pulls that wonderful metaphor. This is who you are. You're the giant killer.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you messing with a fool? Why are you doing this?
Right.
And so, she's allowing him to see who he is versus who he's being tempted to be.
Right.
And he cannot be Saul. We need him to be something different. And so you see the wisdom and the poetry in her words that you just don't get with a lot of speeches from women in the Bible. I mean, we've got the songs, of course, but in the narratives, we don't see this kind of shrewdness very often, and I love it. So, verse 30, and when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pains of conscience for the having shed the blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation for himself. So she knows the prophecies about David. She knows what's been said about him. And what's really interesting, we don't. We only have one prophecy at this point, which is Hannah's. So she may have known that one. I mean, that would have been very expected for the women at that time to know the prophecies of other women. They would have been handed around at the watering well. Maybe Samuel made some other public declarations. We're not told. It's possible that Saul himself may have actually prophesied about David's reign. I mean, when he's the ESV says ranting in his own house, or whenever he was laid out naked at Ramah. But she's also speaking her own divine decrees. She's putting her insight into the message. And she includes this little stinger at the end. David will only enjoy this protection if he has a clear conscience. And that's going to require two different things from him. And so he shouldn't spill blood without cause. So all of his battles need to be battles that God has commanded for a specific reason. And when we look at these battles and we look at the people God has called Israel to confront, we know there's specific reasons. We've talked about that previously. So I'm not going to go into all of that. But the second is that he would not work out salvation for himself. Now, the ESV does a good job on translating here. The word is Yasha, which is the basis of Yeshua. Many translations render this actually as vengeance or to avenge or victory. They lose that aspect of the salvation declaration here.
You said in the ESV it doesn't say vengeance? Because it says it in my ESV.
Hold on. What verse are we in?
We are in verse 31. Without cause for my Lord taking vengeance himself. So is that...
Okay, or without cause, or the Lord working salvation himself is
that what it says in yours?
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and so now I can kind of
play a lot of theology on that. I can see why the ESV would render it not working salvation for yourself.
Exactly. We have to look at the ESV translation committee is Calvinistic in their viewpoint. So the idea that
I'm not saying that's a bad translation either. I mean, of course, I don't speak Hebrew, or read it for that matter.
I really, because like I said, the word is Yasha. So, and like I said, Yeshua, Jesus, we that's the basis of that. And so I think this is a good translation. I think that even though the translation committee is showing their bias here, I think this is actually not so much bias as just proper translation. Yeah. So what's the...
Well, that's what I'm trying to find it here. Gotta remember how my numbers go. So.
1, 2.
And my Lord, and that the Lord sought redress with his own hands.
Okay. Yeah. I think from what I read on this, that this could be an idiom that does have that vengeance kind of connotation to it. But when you think about salvation, there is that vengeance kind of connotation to salvation when you realize we've been bought with a price from the powers, from Ben Belial, that we are no longer beholden to an enemy that tried to oppress us, and God is going to triumph over those enemies that tried to hurt his children.
Yeah.
But also, I think the thing, too, to remember is we're supposed to be contrasting with Saul. And Saul was almost compulsively compelled to try to work out salvation for himself.
Yeah.
He didn't have any faith. He was constantly disobeying and trying to overstep those bounds to be able to hold on to that throne and maintain that image. And so David's reign has to be different. And how is it different? By walking in faith and obedience and doing what God tells him to do, even whenever it doesn't make sense to him. And I think that's one of the things sometimes we as Christians have a hard time dealing with. I know I do. when God tells us to do things that don't make sense to us, because we're supposed to be rational, reasonable creatures. And it would make sense to keep the livestock alive. It would make sense to not kill everyone.
Mhm, mhm.
And that was not the command. The command was to do exactly what God said for Saul to do, specifically with King Agag and his crew. So, verse 30, I love this. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. So, this is about as brazen as it gets. She knows exactly what she's saying here. She's already thrown her husband under the bus. He's nobody. He has no power. He's of no consequence. And so when the Lord has dealt well with you and removed your enemies from the face of the earth, pretty much is what she's saying, you need to remember me.
Mhm.
And by calling David my Lord, that phrase in the right context, in many contexts in the Bible, actually means my husband. And she's called him that 14 times in this speech.
Mhm.
And so she's planting that seed deep in his head. And plus the writer has already been foreshadowing what's going to happen. And she has no problem asking for what she wants, which, very biblical. You have not because you ask not. And so the really interesting element is what she's saying beyond marry me.
Yeah.
She's saying, if you're faithful to God, then it's going to mean good things to me.
Yeah.
And how true is that? When our leadership is faithful to God, then good things happen for those under his care. And so, and we can talk, that could be politics, that could be church leadership, that could be a teacher at school. If you're in charge of people, your faithfulness, your level of faithfulness impacts the well-being of people under your care. And I think so often we forget that that's a huge component of being a leader. And if that means nothing to a leader, then they don't need to be in leadership.
Mhm.
Because Saul obviously did not have that element of compassion. So, verse 32, and David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me." Verse 33, "Blessed be your discretion. Blessed be you who kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand." So, thank you for keeping me from being Saul. Thank you for being who God has said you are. Thank you for reminding me of who I am. He's repeating Abigail's words back to her, just as she was kind of repeating his words back to him. And the writer's really showing us how these two, they're such a good fit. They complement each other well. They understand how the mind of the other one works. And, the word that David uses to describe discretion, it's used 13 times in the Bible, and it can be translated as taste or judgment, which is really interesting because in Exodus 16:31, it's used to describe the flavor of manna specifically.
Okay.
So now in 1 Samuel 21:14, it's used to describe David hiding his judgment whenever he is pretended to be mad before the king of Gath. So in Proverbs 119:16, David uses this word to when God teaches good judgment. And in Psalms 119. In Proverbs 11:22, a woman without discernment or discretion is like a gold ring in the snout of a pig. But it's also found in the superscription of Psalm 34. And we just talked about that not too long ago. And remember, that was the story where David was pretending to be mad. That was the reason why David wrote that. But it's also saying at Rosh Chodesh because Rosh Chodesh is a holiday celebrating women,
Mhm.
and specifically women who were able to discern time
Mhm.
at Sinai. And you'll have to go back to the episode to get all of that. But it's also about experiencing the beauty and the goodness in God's creation. Taste and see God is good is
Mhm.
in that psalm. And so we've got this really great web of meaning and intent that we can see it running throughout these chapters of Samuel that we've covered, where David's whole life is beginning to take shape, not just within the idea of politics, but the people within his life are influencing how he perceives the world. And we're seeing how God is bringing the right people in, and there's the right amount of tribulation. But then people who are choosing to align with him are also helping him see the world in a way that maybe he hadn't seen before.
Mm.
And I love it because there's so much depth in the minutia. So anyway, verse 34. For surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been one left to Nabal, so much as one male. So this is why we love David. When he is confronted and you know that he sees what he's doing wrong, he accepts the correction. And I don't know, and maybe we'll find one as we go through, but to my knowledge, at this particular point in time, I don't know of any situation where David was confronted and someone said, hey, this is where you did wrong, that David didn't respond with repentance, contrition. And then he even goes on to praise God that God cared enough to actually correct him. And so the fact that David can do that, that's why he's worthy to be king.
Right.
So I want to kind of pause a little bit further on this, because David not only is rejoicing that God corrected him, he's rejoicing specifically that a woman corrected him. Men at this time really weren't big on women correcting them at all, let alone a king. And I love the fact that there's no shame and pride doesn't get in his way, and that he will exalt her even as he receives the correction. And so I think that maybe one of the many reasons why churches kind of bypass this, because you really can't just read what's on the page and teach it in any kind of depth without undermining some of the other teachings about women. Because how dare a woman correct leadership, particularly male leadership? And yet here's David, the king of Israel, God's Messiah. Thank you. You are so wise. So I have to love this. And Rachel Adelman, I mentioned her before on some of our episodes. She wrote The Feminine Ruse. Such a great book. She actually makes the statement that not only did we not hear it from the pulpit, that this is an underread piece of the Bible,
right,
and that there's just a handful of scholarly articles concerning this passage. And so
all right, well, sounds like we got somebody working outside with the chainsaw, so let's take a break real quick.
Okay.
Anyway, so sorry about that. If you are watching on YouTube, you probably saw a little jump there. I forgot we had a guy coming to take some trees out of the front today, and he just started to work.
We're in Oklahoma. When you hear chainsaws, you run. We're close enough to Texas to make that a priority.
Anyway,
no.
What were you saying? Let's get back to what we were talking about.
Okay, fine. I was talking about how Edelman, basically, she noted that there's just like a handful of scholarly articles on this passage. It is not a passage that is studied a lot, and so
right.
we're not just saying, hey, we had a faulty kind of upbringing with this. Seems to be endemic. Yeah, exactly. So verse 35, then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said, go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition. So David is specifically saying, I have obeyed you. I have obeyed a woman. Oh my goodness, how scandalous is that? The word he uses here is actually shema. And if you know anything about Hebrew,
I've heard, I've listened, and not just that the sound has entered your ear. It's that you have listened and obeyed.
Exactly. So, I mean, this is super high praise that he's giving to her. And when we are being told so often this is such a patriarchal society, women are of no value, and this is David, the foreshadowing of the Messiah who's is to come, then this has some amazing connotations. I have granted your petition. Literally, I have lifted up your face. And so we find the same wording in Genesis 19:21 when the angel talks to Lot, and when Lot says, "Hey, I want to go to Zoar, the little town here." The angel says, "I've lifted up your face." Job 42:89, God is talking concerning Job's prayer for his friends. So basically, this phrase is the strongest way of saying, I'm going to do exactly what you asked me to do.
Yeah.
There's not a much more emphatic way to say that. So, verse 36, this is where the story really takes off. And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing until the morning light. So, a couple of things going on. He's having a feast like a king. This kind of further establishes the idea that Nabal may have thought that he was more fitting to be a king than David.
Mhm.
And he had enough food in his house, and I thought this was an interesting thing to think about. He had enough food in his house to have a feast like a king, despite the fact that Abigail just took off with.
Oh yeah, that's one of the things I was thinking of. Like she just gave him a huge portion of food, and there's still enough to have a huge feast. So he wasn't hurting for any of the stuff that David asked for.
Yeah, and which makes his stinginess all the more appalling. And the other thing you notice in the text specifically, I remember many times being told that Boaz was not drunk, that he was just really happy.
Right.
But the text specifically confirms here in this verse, he had a merry heart, for he was drunk.
Mm-hmm. It confirms the idiom.
Yeah, you can't get around it. So the other thing that stood out to me is she's smart enough not to pick a fight with a drunk and a fool.
Yeah, fair enough.
If you spend any time at the college crowds or hanging out with biker bars, as I've done in previous lifetimes, this is something you should know. Just somebody's drunk and a fool, you just save your words. And so she waits and she picks her moment, which we shouldn't expect anything less of her. So verse 37, in the morning when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. So,
interesting phrasing.
Oh, wow. Okay, so she waits until he sobers up. The wine goes out of him. Remember the play on words we talked about earlier, the two skins of wine that she brought to David. They were built on the same stem, the Nun, the Bet, and the Lamed, or NBL. The words are totally connected. So as wine was going to flow out of the skins to provide sustenance and nourishment and merriment for David's men, now wine has gone out of Nabal. So his wife told him these things. We know what those are. We're smart. And his heart died within him. There's some debate on what this means. We really, this is not a medical book. And
Right.
There's so much about the human condition that is not known. He's not dead at this point. He becomes immobilized, and he's as stone. Now, remember what she told David. She says, anyone who opposes you, their life will go out of them as a stone from a sling. So we're seeing this connection. God is literally enacting what she had said to David. So we
we also think of the heart also in the language here is going to also be synonymous with like a mind.
Mhm.
So could be he lost his mind. So to me, I'm thinking of a stroke.
That's exactly. That's my. That's what I think. Several other people have speculated that's what it is, and I think there's good reason to think that, especially as we progress. We just can't say that that's exactly what the Bible's saying, because the Bible doesn't have that vocabulary,
Right.
and so you recognize limitations. But what is so fun about this is
it fun? This is.
I was married to a fool once upon a time. It's fun because, God actually, he's moving on her behalf, but is he? And that's the debate, because, a lot of people are saying, oh, she killed him. She actually was the one who killed him. Now,
That was my curiosity, is that there is any speculation on that, because it almost sounds like that.
It's very
Because
premeditated,
I mean,
it seems.
I mean, if you listen to her speech, basically she's like, okay, here's the deal. You can't be the one to kill this guy,
Right? But
because
nothing's stopping me.
but if you, I mean, because you kind of wonder, it's like, if David were to be the one to kill him, and then she went off to marry him, it would be like, well, David's just this guy who kills and takes what he wants.
Exactly.
And then, but she's like, well, hold on.
I got this covered. But at the same time, she admonished David not to work out salvation with his own hand. And so, is it not okay for David to do that, but it's okay for her? So you got to kind of wonder, is she a hypocrite or not, is really what it boils down to. Because, and we're not told. I think the text is.
I don't think it's even necessarily a hypocrite or not. It's kind of like, you can't be seen as the one to dispatch this guy.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a way that could be read. Now, of course, we're not told if she does actually poison him. If she did, that's how I would read it. If we want to take the text for what it says, then she's just kind of going, well, I guess that worked out.
Well, and the other speculation is, did she know that he had a pre-existing condition that she just decided to just goading good and get him stirred up over it, that, how dare she?
Yeah, because I mean, if she did tell him everything that she told David, she basically told her husband, "Hey, I proposed to the future king. He's cool with it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
he's in."
What does she? Yeah, what does she tell him? And that's the thing. It's like, I these are the questions we have to ask. And the thing is, it's not an instantaneous death. And so we're told in verse 38, about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. And that's part of the debate, is because Abigail tells Nabal the words that turn him to stone, but God is the one who strikes him dead.
Mm.
So how much, how much was she playing in? Did she just, like I said, I think possibly what happened, she told him, no, my speculation, and we gotta be clear about that. I think she knew exactly how to push his buttons, and I think she just got him so mad that he did have a stroke, and then finally God took him out. But also that 10 days, and that's 10 days David wasn't there.
Right.
That's 10 days where David is removed from the situation.
Yep.
And here's the thing, if she had wanted him dead, like to truly kill him, to be an active participant of that, well, the guy is as a stone during those 10 days. What would have stopped her?
Right. Right.
So, I think she did push his buttons, but I don't think she necessarily was premeditating his death. But again, the text kind of leaves you there to wonder. And we can also add into this the factor that she is a prophetess. She is identified as a prophetess according to almost every ancient tradition. She could have just been prophesying what she knew was going to happen to her husband in that role.
Fair enough.
And so Adelman, she actually says that the bloodless death of Nabal is actually the evidence of that God was the one who did it. And the fact that no blood was spilled and nobody had to bear a blood guilt was very significant.
I can see that. I mean, that would make sense. And again, it's always good to side with the text.
Yeah. And what you wind up, there's this wonderful contrast between the deaths that are averted, because, David was going to strike everyone down with a sword, and the death that's enacted. And, one is bloody and brutal, and the other one is without all the gore. And so we're being shown that this is still part of God's will. It's not something that David or Abigail have manipulated into being.
Right.
And and it's a troubling thing to appreciate this. I'm having a hard time not laughing, but at the same time, this is a woman who's being delivered from a fool of a husband, and God is dealing well with this woman. And I love the fact that God is stepping in And, maybe this is another reason the story is avoided. I can't see it going well in many of the churches to get up and preach to women, hey, if your husband's full, don't worry, God's got you covered. I don't think that happens too often, by the way, but it does happen, as obviously presented in the text. So, it's like I said, it's a great story because I think there's a lot of hope in there. And it's not just a fairy tale because David doesn't swoop in to save Abigail.
Sure.
She was going to be part of the collateral damage. She saves herself. I mean, she does it through obedience to God, and she's in the role of a prophetess, but she chose to become an active participant in working out salvation with God, not on her own, though.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, I'm amused by the story.
No, there's lots of interesting things about it, and there is. I mean, I don't know. I'm probably not as amused as you are, but go ahead.
Yeah, a little dark humor here. But the Bible's got lots of dark humor. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal and kept back his servant from the wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head." So David's seeing this as God's direct punishment. And he's not only seeing it as God's direct punishment of Nabal punishment against Nabal on Nabal, he's also seeing it as God's blessing to David in this. And I know that we live in a time where Christianity and faith is supposed to be all rainbows and butterflies, and God loves everyone, and nobody's ever going to be hurt by the love of God. Let's just be honest about the fact that sometimes when people who are trying to hurt us get stopped by God, it hurts them. And so it can be a huge blessing for us whenever God steps in to protect his children.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not an awful thing because Nabal chose to be a fool. All he had to do was go, hey, this guy is the anointed king of Israel. God has already specified this is who he is.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, Nabal decides to violate all the customs of his land and country, and he's very much acting like the men of a city we heard about not too long ago called Gibeah. And so he could have easily become the husband of a woman who was brutalized in the same way the concubine was.
Right.
And so the fact that this does not happen, now we're starting to see the kingdom is moving forward and it's moving out of that dark time of the judges. And it's a great picture when you realize the progression here. So, we should not forget that Nabal is presented as just a horrible person throughout all of this. And so, I am looking because I've talked a lot and I got lost in my notes.
Well.
And yeah.
Okay. Well, the story is interesting, and I do find it funny that like as soon as David hears, he's like, "Well, guys, go tell her that I guess we'll go on with that marriage thing."
Yeah.
So.
Well, and we've got this whole situation where David recognizes who she is and what she's worth.
Right. And
remember when we go back to the story of Abraham and Sarah, part of the holdup there with the arrival of Isaac is that Abraham takes a really long time to recognize that Sarah is his fitting bride.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in this passage, we have the Abigail who is the mirror of David in almost every respect. I mean, she's the underestimated, overlooked, neglected wife of this fool. And as such, she's trapped by circumstances in much the same way that David would have been trapped by circumstances. And here she's got this staggering command of words that are not only brilliant, they're prophetic. And she will, she uses these words to elevate her to a position that was beyond her own ability. She's this really weird mixture of humility and pride that we see in David too.
Sure.
And I really, that's the reason why I really like her as a character. But there also comes this question of what if David had actually seen her as the fitting queen? Because she's not the queen. She is a wife, and she's honored and she's respected, but we're going to find out that she's not the one who gets elevated to the highest pinnacle within the court. So, and David's going to have issues with women. That's just part of who David is.
Yeah.
So, verse 38b, uh, this is 38b through 40. David, he remembers Abigail, and he sends his servants back to get her and to secure her as his wife. That is the intent. He makes, there's no niceties about her. Just bring her back. And she's a willing participant. I mean, when the servants get there, she bows before them, and she declares that she will wash the feet of the servant that David sends. I mean, again, that humility.
Yeah. Well, is it that, or is it kind of, compared to the last few years, this seems like a good proposition.
Well, it had to be. And that's the thing, because she had been, if you're ever stuck in a room with a fool for 5 minutes, it's horrible. Now imagine living with one for 5 years, and one who has total control over your life. But the fact that she is willing to do this, and you got to remember, her husband's the richest guy around, and he's feasting like a king. So he's probably very well respected in the community, at least on some level. And she's saying, I don't have to hang on to the trappings of all of this.
Right.
So in verse 42, she hurries to mount the donkey, and 5 women who serve her follow on foot, which is kind of an interesting contrast. She's willing to wash the feet of David's servants, but she still has 5 servants who come with her. And so, again, like I said, that mixture of humility and pride that we see in her, she becomes his wife. And she's the only wife that David has that we're told how she feels about marrying David.
Yeah.
She's eager. She's prepared to go with him. And it sounds like, the guy showed up and she's like, grab the bags, girls, we're packed. She was ready to go.
And of course, it's a love story that ends, not great.
Yeah.
David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and and both of them because of his became his wives. It's like,
yeah. And that's the thing. And if you notice the order there, this is one of the reasons why we know she was not the first wife or the queen, because she's not the first woman mentioned. And so, and of course, he's had Michael back home, who isn't around anymore. And what I found to be interesting, because I had not considered this. Now, we talked about, this is Nabal's from Bethlehem. He's from the tribe that founded Bethlehem, that he was possibly a distant relative. So Bergen suggests that this might be a Levirate marriage. And so David would have been functioning as the kinsman redeemer.
Interesting. I hadn't considered that.
Never really thought about it. And as both of them being members of the tribe of Judah, David would have qualified. And, and usually it was the closest male relative, but there were exceptions. So the only child accredited to David and Abigail is never a contender for the throne. Not once is he presented as someone who might inherit, and which is fitting if this is a Levirate marriage, because the child would not be considered David's. The child would be considered Nabal's.
Oh.
Exactly. So we also, if you notice, as we read through this,
can you imagine growing up with that though? Like, I was, I could have been a son of David, but I get to be the son of the fool.
Right.
And it's like,
maybe this is why he wasn't at all the parties. That would be an interesting.
Missed it by that much,
right. But when we read through the other accounts, where anywhere Abigail's mentioned, she is called the wife of Nabal. She's not called, she's married to David, but then we always have that little addition there. So we know that this is where she originated. Ahinoam, sorry.
Ahinoam, that's a hard name.
I keep on, okay, never mind. I don't know why that does that to my brain.
I couldn't tell you.
This is the same. This is the same name as one of Saul's wives, because of the timeline and the circumstances. It's probably not the same woman. Probably a different person. She's always mentioned first, and this means that she was married before Abigail, and she's going to be the mother of Amnon. So we're going to find him later on in the story. Troubling story. but that's what we know about her. We find out in verse 44 that Saul has given Michael to a guy named Palti, the son of Laish of Galim. Wonderful name there. Some of the commentators read that verse to mean that Saul forced Michael to divorce David. Doesn't say that. The text doesn't really support any kind of divorce. We don't know. Saul wasn't the best at keeping the rules when he was angry.
Sure.
Later, David's going to demand that Michael be returned to him. And so the fact that David still feels like he has a right to her as a wife means that even if there was a divorce under duress, it was meaningless because both parties had not agreed to,
Sure.
The rabbis claim that this guy Palti recognized that Michael was not really his wife and that Michael was still married to David. And so that in order to keep from sinning and violating another man's wife, that every night when he came to bed, he'd put the sword in the bed between them. And that way he never touched her. And it was fitting for right. And so...
Well, I mean, that's just as ridiculous as the few times I have heard this all read through during a sermon or Bible story lesson, that the justification for David marrying Abigail was that his wife had been given to someone else, so it was okay for him to have another wife. But we also leave off the fact that he also got a second one right there.
Don't you know, good Christian men don't get divorces? They aren't Christians yet.
It's just I don't know. Sometimes it's like, why bother?
Yeah.
I granted you and I speculate a lot about things from now and then, just and think about like what people might be thinking or have different questions. But I really feel like that one's kind of stretching.
Yeah, it probably was not in keeping. Now, here's the reason why I don't think there was a divorce.
Well, I don't think there was either, but that's just me going, it's not in the text.
Right. That's a big one.
Yeah. And two, I think that Saul did it to spite David. That's
Absolutely.
why I don't think there was a divorce. But go ahead. What do you got?
Well, because in the Torah, if a man and woman divorce, it's expected that they remarry. This is Bible, by the way. So when I say Torah, we're looking Genesis through Deuteronomy. Mm-hmm. If a man and woman divorce, it's expected that they remarry. The one thing that is forbidden is for them to divorce a second time and remarry each other. That's an abomination.
Yeah, I hadn't considered that part of it. But you're right. That makes sense.
Yeah, so I think David basically looked at this whole thing as Saul as an act of war in an attempt to try to humiliate him. Said, here, yeah, you can have her. Because Saul doesn't care about the women at all.
Right.
David does some horrible things with women in his life, but there is a level of respect, as we've just seen with Abigail and his speech to her and his treatment of her, that Saul never attains. And so, yeah, is David perfect? Absolutely not, but we do see progress. So before we move forward, I want to do a real quick recap because I don't want us to forget this. At this point, David has a 600-man army. He has a prophet named Gad. He has a priest, Abiathar. And now he has 3 wives. The most significant of this is he has Abigail. And the reason why this is so important for him to be married to Abigail, he now has a woman who was married to the richest man in the country who had the ability to feast like a king after providing his troops with food.
He's got a whole lot of sheep now.
He's got
more goats.
Yes. He has just got the funding for his little revolution. And he also, bonus points, a prophetess for a wife. And so David has what he needs to begin his royal court. But there's going to be a few little detours along the way. But as this is going along, he's gaining clout, he's gaining influence, he's starting to get the reputation of a man who can be trusted. There's a certain level of credibility that comes along when you've got the right people on your team.
Yeah. Well, and I do kind of wonder, I mean, now that you mentioned that, it's kind of, it seemed like he was overreacting a little bit whenever he was denied the things he asked for.
Yes.
And so I'm curious about was it possible that he kind of went into that thinking, this is my shot
Mm-hmm.
to get one rich person on my side, and that he was frustrated when his plan was foiled?
I think there is definitely that at play, and not only would he expect like the hospitality due just a traveling stranger in the
Mhm.
land. If Naval was a family member, he could have expected Naval to help him because, hey, we're blood. The idea. So I do think that there is that idea, that thought process within David, and there's a danger in getting close to a dream where you think you got it all figured out, and you think, we just got to make this next step. We got to do this one more thing, and it's all going to fall into place. And how many times do you get there and God's like, we're going to hold up, and we're going to hold up for an undisclosed amount of time. And you're going to have to wait until I supernaturally bring this into existence because you don't get to do it on your own.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Well, and again, that kind of even ties back into what we talked about before in other episodes about that failure of imagination,
mhm.
where David going in thinking, well, this is the way it's going to get done. And then when it doesn't get done that way, God's like, no, 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 no. Just, and basically uses Abigail to tell him, look, this is not how it's going to happen.
Mhm.
Just wait.
Well, and to think about the fact that the salvation, and I mean that salvation wise, as far as like literally his troops needed to eat,
Mhm.
came through a woman who supposedly had no power. And what an unexpected means of provision.
Hmm.
And now this woman will continue to provide in new ways. And so, yeah, this incident is very pivotal because we are seeing how David's theology is being formed. Because what he learns here with Nabal is actually going to play out again in chapter 26. And we begin to see why it's so important. You have 24 with the cave incident,
Mhm.
here with Abigail and Nabal, and then again with Saul and confronting him for the last time.
Right.
You've got to have these three stories together so you can see how David is evolving and growing as a person. And so it's going to be interesting to get into that story and to see how they do play off each other. And so David, I don't think he would have gotten the understanding he did if God had not said, hold up, you can't just be a conceited jerk
Right.
and expect me to honor you.
Yep.
And so that if that's your takeaway for the episode. So,
Fair enough. Well, that seems like a good place to pause right at the end of the chapter. We very rarely do that.
Worked well.
Yeah. So, well, that's been one of my favorite ones so far. There's a lot of interesting information in there. So,
A lot of fun to study. I
Yeah.
just wish there was more information. I want to dig deeper. And
Yeah.
but academia's neglect has left us here.
Well,
So
of course, just blame everyone else. So, I think that's what we
Yeah.
learned not to do, right? Is that
yeah,
of
no,
the
I like
lesson.
yeah, okay, whatever, sure.
So, anyway? Well, everyone out there, thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, hit us up on Raven Creek SC on all the social media, ravencreeksc.com, to be part of the conversation. And in the meantime, we'll see you later. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, a Raven Creek Social Club production. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you like what you've heard, please write us a review on iTunes or consider supporting us on patreon.com/RavenCreekSC. As always, thank you for listening, and don't forget to join us next week.